Rorschach's Journal, October 12th, 1985. Dog carcass in alley this morning. Tread burst stomach. This city is afraid of me. I have seen its true face. Alright guys, I'm talking about Watchmen Chapter 1 and be comparing it to Zack Snyder's 2009 movie. Let's get into it. Oh, and of course, spoilers throughout for Watchmen. Let me just start off by saying that the opening of the cartoon is really nice. It's got that nice sort of yellow on black, very iconic color scheming from Watchmen, the comic book, which they've continued here in Chapter 1 as well, which of course you found in the other renditions of Watchmen, including the TV show and the movie and of course the original comic book. One thing I noticed, and which I hadn't really thought about until now, and I saw the original Watchmen movie back in 2009 in the cinema when it came out, but this is set in October, and when you think about the sort of the themes of the movie about the end of the world and nuclear war and the Cold War and the rest of it, I don't think it's a coincidence that this is set in October and that the Cuban Missile Crisis also took place in October, 13 days in October. The cartoon, of course, begins as a murder mystery. Essentially, that's the same way that the comic book and the movie start. So somebody has been killed and we're now trying to find out who has killed him and why. And you might find out that this guy has a bunch of different enemies, and there's quite a few people that would have very good reason to try and have him killed. It's immediately noticeable that the storytelling in this, even in the first sort of 5-10 minutes, is much tighter. As I said, they've combined some scenes like when Edward Blake, when the comedian is being killed and the detectives are looking into it. The story moves at a much faster clip. So I think one of the issues with Watchmen, and particularly the more extended cuts, is that it can move quite slowly. Edward Blake is killed in this in the first 5 minutes, and it's happening sort of at the same time interspersed with another scene. And I do have to say this, immediately when I hear Rorschach's voice, I do prefer Jackie Earle Haley. When I hear the comedians speak, I do prefer Jeffrey Dean Morgan. It might just be the case that I'd seen the movie first, but I don't think it's just that they're great actors, and of course the movie cost $150 million to make, so that budget has gone somewhere. I would say that overall the movie looks and sounds better, but having said that, this cartoon is quite nice to look at. And everybody will look up and shout, "Save us," and I'll whisper, "No." So in the movie, of course, it's Dan Dreiberg, it's Night Owl that goes to see Adrian Veidt, talking about Rorschach's theory that somebody's taken out costumed heroes, somebody's killing off the Watchmen. But of course, in the cartoon, it's Rorschach himself. Rorschach goes and visits Adrian Veidt himself. Again, I don't know what happened in the comics because I haven't read it, but it was just a bit of a different sort of feel there. So in the movie, it's Dan Dreiberg. It's a rainy day. It's sort of quite a grey, glum day, like a day in the UK somewhere, but in the movie, of course, it's Rorschach, and I remember the line specifically where Adrian Veidt says, he was practically a Nazi, talking about the comedian. That was said to Dan Dreiberg in the film. And it was cool seeing Rorschach sort of open the window. He's got a bit of a rope there, and then he just sort of abseils down the side of the building. Given what I've said so far, it's not going to be a surprise to you that I'm going to say that my favorite rendition of Dr. Manhattan was from the 2009 movie. I would say that the voice, of course, doesn't sound as good. I think that the actor who played Dr. Manhattan in 2000 film did a fantastic job. I think, certainly did a better job than the way he looks and sounds in the TV show played by Abdul Yahya Mateen. But I think that really comes down to just having a budget. If you got $150 million, you can afford to have an actor and then put a bunch of blue LEDs on him so he's giving off real light, and then replace him and his face, with CGI, make him complete CGI and give him the body of a bodybuilder. You can do that with a big movie. Whereas, I think in the TV show, they just didn't have that kind of budget. And in the cartoon, they made more of an effort to make it look like the graphic novel, which makes sense. Absolutely, that makes sense. But I would say that Dr. Manhattan, both in his voice, in the way that he looks, even in the effects for his powers, the teleportation, the sort of, in the movie there's this kind of whirring sound when he teleports. There's this kind of like big flash and then a boo, and you don't get that in this. It's more sort of like a photography sound, like a big flash from one of those old cameras. And so I would just say that I much preferred the way that Dr. Manhattan looks, sounds, and everything in the movie than he did in the cartoon. The cartoon still looks very, very nice. I really like what they've done with the animation, and I think looking at the credits at the end, I think it was probably a Korean studio that did all of this, but it's quite nice to look at. One of the things that is quite amazing was seeing Dr. Manhattan's sequence in Vietnam, of course. That incredible shot where he's, 100 foot tall, and he's like pointing at people and making them explode. And of course, he helps win the Vietnam War. There's also the scene with the comedian, Dr. Manhattan, of course, the Vietnamese lady. You will remember me and you will remember my country, as she smashes the glass bottle over his face. And, of course, he guns her to death. This is the comedian. He's not a particularly nice man, to put it very bluntly. But I did notice at the end credits that was played by Kelly Hu. Kelly Hu's been in a bunch of different stuff. She was in Knights of the Old Republic 2 and Martial Law with Sammo Hung, if anyone remembers that. I'd say that there's more of a somberness expressed in the movie than there was in in Chapter 1, I think. And maybe that's just the fact of having actors play these characters instead of having them, done through cartoon characters instead. Even when Jeffrey Dean Morgan, playing the comedian, ends up killing the Vietnamese woman, I think he kind of takes a shot and he says something like, God help us all, kind of thing. And, he's just done this awful thing and he still looks a bit more upset. There's a lot more sort of expression, of course, in the movie than there is in this. One of my favorite movie scenes of all time is that scene in 2009's Watchmen, where they're showing Dr. Manhattan's background. So, up to that point in the movie, all you really know about him is that he's this superpowered being, but you still don't know too much. He's just a guy who kind of walks around and become large and small, and he's very smart and, can play with very complex sort of nuclear equipment. But you don't really know who he is until you see the sequence going through his background. And it's a 10-minute scene. And I find myself watching this scene every few months. Just brilliantly done by Zack Snyder in the movie. Fantastic. The music that he uses was from Goyan Skutsky, some old movie that had lots of different shots and a really good soundtrack by Philip Glass. But that music was also, I think, used in the GTA 4 trailer when GTA 4 was announced. But that's a fantastic scene. And just when they show, of course, John Osterman for the first time before he became Dr. Manhattan, and they're going through his story and how he met Janie Slater and, his dad, and how his dad was a watchmaker, and all of that is really, really, really brilliantly done in the film. And over 10 minutes, you find out exactly who this guy is, showing how he got his powers, how those powers developed, how he ended up with the Silk Spectre, with Laurie. Absolutely incredible. And I'll watch it over and over again because it's just so well done. Going through him as a weapon, the dialogue in that scene is just brilliant. There's lines that have just stuck with me. When he goes into the time displacement chamber and he says, "I feel fear for the last time," and that fantastic soundtrack going off in the background. And again, it's a little bit different from Watchmen Chapter 1. In Watchmen Chapter 1, sort of very similar, of course, he goes into the time displacement chamber. He can't get out, of course, and Janie's there. Janie's with Wally, and she was the one who locked the program in. And she says at some point, "This is my fault." And she can't watch him, and she leaves. And of course, in the movie, he's begging her to stay, just like the cartoon. But he says, "Janie, don't leave me." And of course, she leaves him. She kind of leaves the room. She goes out into the hallway crying because she can't watch him go through this. So many good lines in this. They're shaping me into something gaudy. I remember watching the movie and hearing the line, because I didn't know why he was called Dr. Manhattan. Why the hell would you call him Dr. Manhattan? And it didn't click at the time until he says, "They call me Dr. Manhattan. The name has been chosen for its ominous associations and the fears it will raise in America's enemies." That's the line in the movie. It's slightly different in the cartoon, but all of that is brilliant. The Superman exists and he is American. Just the scene where they're sort of demonstrating his power, and he puts out his arm and he kind of opens his hand, and then the tank just kind of splits into its constituent parts, and then he closes his hand into a fist, and it just becomes like a clump of scrap metal. Just absolutely incredible when they're just showing what he is and exactly just how powerful he is. And even back when I was watching the movie, I thought, he's a god. He's basically God. The way they're talking about him is like he's a god. And the scene with Janie, where Janie says that, she will grow old, and I am more like a god now, and I say, if there is a God, I am nothing like him. And again, the dialogue's slightly different. The meaning is the same in chapter 1, and I wonder if they've just taken it straight from the graphic novel, whereas it might have been altered slightly for the film. But that scene, at least in the movie, is really powerful. And the end bit of that, especially, where she takes off the earrings. Oof, as I lie to her, it is 1966, and she throws the earrings at him, and he says, "In the stillness, I prefer the stillness here. I am tired of Earth, these people. I am tired of being caught in the tangle of their lives." The scene, by the way, in the cartoon is extended. It's closer to about sort of 13-14 minutes. They've left a lot more in it, and I wonder if that's because the theatrical cut of the movie, they didn't include that stuff, but perhaps they included it in the extended cut. But more is explained about sort of the final lines of that scene, as well, as John is looking at the photo. In the cartoon, they show more about where did he even get the photo from. They show him going to some old house and some old base somewhere, and he gets discovered, and he turns to a soldier and says, "Yeah, I'm going to Mars." Because the entire purpose of this scene is obviously to show who Dr. Manhattan is, but it's also to show the extent of his powers. One of the fantastic things that Alan Moore managed to do is to create a character that is not only godlike, but can also see the past, the present, and the future at the same time. So the sort of the beginning of that scene where he's talking about how I'm holding the photo, and then it shows him, and he says, "I become bored, and then I drop the photo." And it brilliantly shows that for him, the past, the present, and the future all exist at the same time, and he sees it all at once. And so in a way, it almost doesn't really matter. I'd imagine it's a bit much to take in all of that all at once for a single person. He's sort of human, though he's kind of more of a god now. The end of that scene, in the movie, they claim their labors are to build their heaven, and yet their heaven is populated with horrors. Perhaps the world is not made. Perhaps nothing is made. A clock without a craftsman. In the cartoon, that's much longer. He's explaining a bit more explicitly what he means by that, when he's looking at all of the people that made decisions that led to him being where he was. His dad hearing about the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and throwing out the watch that John is working on. He made that decision for his son. You're not looking at watches like me. You're going to go into this nuclear stuff. Or when Janie left, was it Janie left the watch? No, he left the watch. He left his watch in that chamber. But Janie was the one who locked in the program beforehand. So all of these decisions are kind of, in a sense, sort of made for him, right? and it shows that helplessness. Although he's a god, it reminds me of Superman, actually. Like, you're a god, but you're still limited in what you can do. There's still a feeling of helplessness. And so that's what he means when he says, perhaps the world is not made. Nothing is made. It's all just, things just happen as they are. There's no sort of, I guess there's no, as he's saying it, there's no intelligent or rhyme or reason. It's just stuff that happened. A clock without a craftsman. I know I've said this a few times. It looks very nice. There are moments where I'm looking at this and I'm looking at the scenes as they're showing the city, or the shot kind of goes up the side of the building and then is looking up at a couple of characters like Laurie and Dan on the roof of the building, and they're having a conversation. And throughout this, I was kind of thinking the contrast between the colors at night, or the lights, and the city at night. It looks very Blade Runner. I'd say even the soundtrack sounds very Blade Runner. The contrast between the sort of the adverts that you're seeing, if you remember the opening of Blade Runner, you've got these very bright colors on these huge screens, and the and the nighttime of the city just looks great. The Rorschach escape scene, he gets set up. He finds Moloch is dead, and he's now got a SWAT team coming up the stairs and a whole bunch of cops waiting outside for him. And they're going to get him, and he has to try and find a way out. And the movie scene as well was really great. They show sort of at least in the movie, he has a matchstick, and he kind of, like, as he's crouching down and moving forward, he strikes it and lights it, and then he uses the spray to to spray the cops in the face with some fire. In the cartoon, he kind of he just flicks the match and it lights up. But the fight scene still looks great. The cops are still blam 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 trying to shoot him. He's dodging their gunfire somehow. Rorschach's quite a badass, and manages to beat the hell out of them, and he uses whatever else he has to hand to try and beat them. Same thing as the movie, of course. He jumps out of the window. There's a great part in the cartoon where it kind of slows down a bit. In the movie, he lands and kind of does a rolling breakfall, if anyone remembers parkour. But in the cartoon, he just kind of lands, and then they start beating him, and he puts up a bit of a fight, but there isn't too much that he can do. And that's really the end point of the cartoon. I think they did a really good job. Looks nice, sounds nice, weird sort of cyberpunk Blade Runner aesthetic going on there, but I think it really works. I think that the credits are actually really good as well. One thing that I noticed in the credits is that they've got those lines from Under the Hood by the first Night Owl. In the original comic books, of course, it's interspersed with a bunch of different extracts from that book, Under the Hood. I think they also have an interview with Janie Slater at the end of the cartoon, which is just, it's a little bit heartbreaking, because Janie is just this bitter, resentful old woman now, and she hates John, and she's essentially saying he kind of deserves everything he gets, because of course he's run away to Mars now, and everyone's sort of asking her about, what she thinks. And I think the last line she says, "Welcome to my world. This is what it's like." So yeah. Depending on how you look at Dr. Manhattan, he's quite a sympathetic figure, or he's quite an unpleasant one as well. But yeah, really, really good. I'm glad that they tried to remain faithful to the graphic novel. What little bit of it that I've read and what I have read about the graphic novel, I would absolutely suggest that you go check out Chapter 1 if you liked Watchmen, if you enjoyed Watchmen, if you think that Dr. Manhattan and Rorschach are absolutely fantastic characters like I do. Go and watch Chapter 1, and I'll be looking forward to seeing Chapter 2 when it comes out. So what do you think, guys? Did you read the graphic novel? Did you watch the movie? Did you watch the cartoon? What did you think? Which rendition of Watchmen do you think is the best? Is it the comic book? Is it the original and still the best? How do you think it compares to the movie? How do you think it compares to the TV show, which was a very, very different beast, very different sorts of characters, even if some of them were the same? But yeah, drop me a comment, like, subscribe, all the rest of it. And I'd like to continue making this kind of content, so if you like it, please do that. And until next time, I will bid you a good day. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye.